Okay, hi everyone. Good evening. I'm Debbie Schwartz, founder of Road to College and the Paying for College 101 group, and I'm here with Luann Lee. And I'll give Luann a chance to explain her background, but we've been working together for many years now, and Luann works with families uh, both on the admission side, but also does a lot of work helping families on the college financial planning side. So tonight, we always get a lot of questions about the financial aid process and if you're divorced, how to handle it. Completely understandable. It does become a little bit more complicated when you're in that situation. There are different rules, sort of say, that apply, and better to understand what those rules are and how the colleges deal with divorced families earlier rather than later. So if you guys can tell and share in the chat what year your student is in high school, that would just be helpful, because we did send this invitation out to actually families on our list that have a 10th grader, 11th grader. May have even been some families with 12th graders, or if you're a 12th grader, you probably have a better idea of how to handle the situation. So if you can share. Let's see. Oh, good. I mean, good. I'm glad to see a lot of families with juniors, so that you can get ahead of the situation. It's so much better than Luann and I, before we got on. It's always a little heartbreaking when a family comes, honestly, late in the process. And normally, the later you go, we don't necessarily have, it becomes harder and harder to help, but particularly when you're in, a situation with divorce. But it's just, there's only so much we can do, like, very late in the process. So thank you for showing up earlier. And we're going to show you a few slides, discuss how colleges do work with, or how they approach families with divorce, and then open it up and just hear what your questions are and try and answer as many as we can. So thank you, Luann, for coming tonight and sharing your expertise. If you want to share a little bit about your background, and then we can go get into the slides.
Sure. Thanks, Debbie. So good evening, everybody. And I'm Luann Lee. I'm the owner of Your College Planning Coach, and I'm based in Northern Virginia in the Warrenton area, where we just had a foot of snow. And Debbie was shocked. She's up in Pennsylvania area. She said, "Gosh, you've had more snow than we have." So, it's we're going to have our whopper of a winter, I think, this year. But I've been in the college planning world almost 20 years now, and I started on the financial side. I was a financial planner, just helping people plan for their future and retirement and saving for college and such, and got to see on credit reports how much debt that at the time graduated students, usually it was, med students or those that went on to law school, master's degrees and such. But the I at the time I thought, gosh, there's a real problem here. Somebody was trying to qualify for a mortgage, and I told her, I said, you already have a mortgage, but it's just disguised as education debt. And she said, yeah, but I'm not in repayment yet, so it doesn't count. Well, fast forward, almost 20 years, she's probably just now finishing off paying. I haven't kept in contact with her over the years. And, I'm pretty sure one of these days I'm going to find that she's going to have a student getting ready for college and say, gosh, I didn't realize had all changed so much. And now I have to be responsible for the bulk of my students' education. So I decided to change over and specialize my practice on college planning, because I figured if I could help a family from overpaying 50 or $100,000 unnecessarily on the cost of college, that could be worth like $500,000 in your retirement. But what has happened over the years is that now instead of it just being on the burden on the shoulders of those that have graduated from, grad school. It's the parents, you parents, that are taking on a lot more of the cost of education for undergrad. And, a lot of mistakes happen during the filing of the FAFSA and the CSS profile. So that's why Debbie and I are doing this tonight, to try to offset some of those, easy, early mistakes. But there were a lot of changes that happened in the world of the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, that were directly related for those that have, have a divorced family, or are separated, and or, have, kids on both sides of the remarried household. So we've just got a few slides here, and then, like Debbie said, we can just open up and do a kind of a ask me anything type of session, because everybody's different. This is not a cookie cutter. Anything related to college is not cookie cutter at all.
Mm.
So every time somebody gives you a four fact answer, just realize that their situation might be a little bit different than yours. And every single day, as long as I've been in this industry, I learn something new every day. And so it's good that you're all here. So what are the changes that divorced families need to know? And I'm glad to see that there's a lot of juniors, and hopefully, some younger families as well, with sophomores and freshmen. So the FAFSA, as I said, the free application for federal student aid, for me, that it's always been the gateway to all financial aid. And you're going to hear a lot of people say, well, you shouldn't even bother to file it. You're not going to get anything. You make too much money. And I always say, I don't care if you have Bill Gates kind of income, you should file the FAFSA, because you never know. In fact, this morning, I had a consultation with a couple who, one of the parents had lost their job in June of last year, and is still unemployed, and has a student that's already in college, and had reached out to the financial aid office. And they said, well, you didn't have the FAFSA or the CSS profile on file for this particular year. So we're going to be talking now about any kind of special consideration or professional judgment for the 25-26 year. And she said, I didn't bother to file because we weren't going to get anything. And the reality is, if they had filed, the school probably would have been able to make some sort of consideration during for this spring term that we're looking at right now. So so don't, it takes, it might take you 30 minutes to do the FAFSA. There's a process to it, and we're not going to go into all the ins and outs of how to file the FAFSA. We've got a YouTube that session that we did, that we always do every year, that you can access that. And for those of you that are going to be filing for the first time next year, those of you that have juniors right now, the first time that you'll file the FAFSA is when your student is in their senior year, filing for the following year that they'll be starting college. So you've got you've got time. But so the 2 years ago, or well, this has been going on for a number of years, the Department of Education has been, getting prepared to make some major changes. And they opened it up last year, finally, and it was a disaster. You've probably all heard that, and shaking in your boots thinking, oh my gosh, this thing is terrible. It's actually been working quite well this year, which is nice. And in the almost 20 years that I've been doing this, it's actually the easiest FAFSA filing that I've ever seen. The one thing that I don't like about it is that the transfer of all your financial tax information is automatic and you don't get to see any of it. You have no control. And I don't really like that because there are sometimes mistakes that are made. But it truly is very simple, but it's still very important to do. And one of the major changes that they made was prior to last year, if you were divorced and or separated, living in both mom and dad living in separate households, then there is only one parent that is going to be the financial filer whose income and assets are going to be assessed for the FAFSA. And so in the past, it was always whoever the student lived with more than 50% of the year, it was going to be that parent. And most of the time, it was very beneficial. If there was a huge disparity between the mom and dad's income and assets, you could make sure that the student lived with the parent that could maybe qualify for some financial need-based aid or some institutional aid. And if their income was lower, that the student would live with them, another week or two longer so that legally they could file the FAFSA, because it's your income and your assets that generate the figures, that the FAFSA, it just comes up with a calculation of where do you sit on the federal poverty guidelines to qualify for any kind of federal need-based aid. It's quite low, that income level. But it's anything above that, and then it just depends on the schools that you're applying to, whether they're going to give any of their institutional aid. So, but if you file the FAFSA, then your student can qualify for the federal loans, the student loans in their name. Some of you that you haven't hit this yet are going to be very surprised to learn that your student as a freshman can only receive $5,500 in a federal student loan as a freshman. So if you've looked at some of the cost of attendance at some of your local schools or any of your private schools, you'll see that there's quite a gap between that 5,500 and maybe 30,000 for your local state school, all the way up to, I've seen a few schools cost of attendance this year close to $90,000 to $100,000 at a lot of private schools. So the FAFSA is important in the regard of federal aid, but not everybody's going to qualify for much. You still don't get anything from FAFSA other than that ability to have that federal student loan, as well as if you are of a low enough income, then your family might be able to qualify for the federal Pell Grant, which is only $7,395 for a full Pell Grant. And that when you file the FAFSA, it assesses your income and assets so that it's if your SAI, Student Aid Index, is anywhere from a negative 1,500 to zero, then your family or your student will qualify for that full $7,395. Typically, a family is going to have, less than $60,000 adjusted gross income to get that grant. So that's just a little bit of the background about the FAFSA. So how is this going to have an impact on those of you that are divorced or separated? So now there's no longer the case where you can kind of work the system in a sense to make sure that the student lives with and in the household that has much less income and assets. But now it's going to be, um, which parent provides the most financial support. And when they were coming up with this ruling for 2 years prior to opening this, I mean, everybody was in a panic. Well, how are they going to have us? What do we have to provide for them to let us know which one of us are going to qualify? And there isn't any of that. It's what you and your ex have to kind of figure out. And the earlier that you can try to have a conversation for the benefit of your children, the better off it will be. And I know sometimes that's not always going to be the case, but in a better world, if we can try to do that to see, okay, which of us are going to be the ones to file the FAFSA, and even if there is going to be a chance where one family is going to be able to qualify for the federal Pell Grant or the subsidized portion of the student loan, the sooner that you can understand which of you will file, the better off it's going to be, less stressful that it's going to be, and you might be able to better plan for the affordability of college. Now, a lot of people think, well, my ex, whether it's the ex-wife or ex-husband, doesn't matter, but my ex provides the child support. So they think that that automatically makes it so that they are providing the most support. Not necessarily. I've worked with a lot of families over the years, and I've seen there's not a lot of child support in most cases that is being paid each year or each month, and that that ex-spouse that's receiving the child support, they are still providing a roof over their kids' heads, food on the table, paying for the sports and the uniforms and scouts and, car insurance and health insurance and whatnot. So I know that it's very hard to say, well, I don't really know what my spouse makes anymore. And we don't discuss those kind of things, which is pretty normal. But you kind of have a ballpark. And so then you want to look at, well, just how much do I support my child outside of the child support? So sometimes, even though the one parent is receiving child support, they can still be the parent that is going to file the FAFSA. So you have to try to come to terms with that ahead of time so that you can figure out, well, all right, I'm going to be the parent that's going to file the FAFSA, or my ex is going to be. And knowing that and trying to figure out what your SAI number is, and there's calculators out there that you can plug that information in that'll help you to have a better understanding of how much you're going to end up having to pay out of pocket beyond, the student loans, and if you're going to be eligible for any kind of um, uh, federal Pell Grant or such. Now, some of you are wondering, well, my child support ends at 18, so my student is going to be independent. And unfortunately, that's not the case. So the student is still going to be considered a dependent for federal financial aid and institutional college aid, as long as they are under the age of 24, or if they still haven't graduated with a bachelor's degree, if they have dependents of their own, that they are providing 50% of the support for that dependent, they can be considered an independent student. If they're in the military and they've been honorably discharged and they're under the age of 24, they're considered an independent student. But just because they're 18 or 19, they still live with you. Maybe you don't file them on your tax return. They've got a part-time job. For college purposes, they're still considered a dependent. So oftentimes we get taxes and college kind of mixed up. And as far as taxes are concerned, a lot of parents will say to me, well, my ex is going to have my student as a dependent on their tax return this year, and I have the next year or whatever because it's in the divorce decree or such. Now, as it stands right now, there is no bearing on if one parent has a student on their tax return as a dependent or not. The other parent can still be considered the parent who is filing the FAFSA. I think that as everything has been changing with the FAFSA and it's going to be tied to the tax return, that in a few more years, once they know that this is running very smoothly, I have a feeling that that might change. And it's going to be a much better situation to be able to prove which parent is the FAFSA filer and not have any red flags pop up as long as the student is a dependent on the tax return for the parent that is filing. As of right now,
Yeah, but that's not in place right now. I don't
no,
want to
it's
confuse
not in
anybody.
place right
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
But I've spoken to a number of college planners that are tax preparers, and that's what they've been working on for the last couple of years. So,
So, Luann, just actually, I'm not even sure
Mhm.
people asked this question yet, but just to help people clarify, this concept of who provides the more financial support, what year does that have to be for? So, for example, and people, and it's understandable if you're here and I see some of the questions somebody's asking what's CSS profile. We're kind of like starting to use language that is normal for us as you get involved in the college planning and the financial aid process. But if you're kind of new and you're a family with a junior, this is new language to you. So, so what another new phrase that I'm going to use is your base year for financial planning or financial aid. And so if you're a family with a junior, your base year just ended because it's 2 years. So your base year is the year that the financial aid form uses the information, your tax information from. So, and the way you kind of think about it is the year that your student is going to enroll in college. So if you're a junior, your student's going to enroll in college in 2026. Then your base year was 2 years before 2026. So it was the tax year of 2024, which just closed. So that's the base year. And that's the tax information that is used for financial planning, for financial aid forms that the colleges and the government's going to look at. But is that also the year that determines who is providing the most financial support if you're in a divorce situation?
Are you asking me?
I'm asking you, yes, to
Oh,
clarify for
okay.
people.
I
Yes,
wasn't sure
yes.
if you were still. So it's actually going to be you're using that tax year. So like right now for 25, 26, we're using the 23 tax year. But for the financial support, it's the prior year, not the prior year where we're using the tax returns, but right now. So this last year of 2024 for anyone that was married or I'm sorry, divorced or separated, it's going to be that year which of the parents provided the support. So it just puts another little twist. So,
Right. That's why I wanted to kind of like make that clear. So,
yep,
so
it'll
for,
be on the slide after this one,
okay, go
and we'll
ahead.
point it out. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and so what if the parents have remarried? And which, happens a great deal, just like the parent that asked me this morning. My ex he has a fiance and they're going to be getting married. Well, I said they might want to hold off a little bit. If you have remarried, now your new spouse is going to be considered as on the FAFSA if it's your household that is going to be the FAFSA filer. Now, Debbie mentioned the CSS profile, which is another form that is a lot more detailed and goes into a real deep dive into all of your financials. And it's for a lot of private schools and maybe some what we call state Ivies and such, the super selective schools. Most of those schools give institutional aid. They don't give merit scholarships so much, but they give of their own institutional aid. And so they'll ask for a lot more details than what you provide with the FAFSA. And so then, if both parents have remarried, then you're going to actually end up having four parents, two parents and two step parents on that CSS profile, assessing everyone's income and assets. So if it's a couple of years before you're going to be ready for filing your first FAFSA and such, and you've got remarrying on your mind, if you might want to reconsider what is that going to mean to how much or how little that we would end up having to pay for our kids for college. And it really, but I hear it all the time. But my new spouse, they have their own children that they're going to be paying for college, and we all understand it, but this is the system that you're working with. So it's something to consider. Now, if your kids are 3 and 4 years old, of course you're not going to wait for another 15 years to get remarried. But if you've got college on the horizon in the next year or so, it could mean a substantial loss in financial need or institutional aid that you could miss out on. So understanding and knowing what your expectations are going to be ahead of time would make a lot of sense to be very strategic with that longer term planning. Now, if there are step parents and step children, and everybody has 50-50 on both sides as far as visitation and such, even if your children from your new spouse's first marriage are not living with you 100% of the time, but if they're visiting, like 50%, then they can count as a member of the household on the FAFSA, even if they're not on your tax return. So it gets, those of you that are in this situation, it can get a little bit tricky to make sure that you're going to get every benefit that you can take advantage of in this situation. Now, if you are separated, people say, well, we haven't gone through the courts yet. And that's okay, as long as you are living in separate households. But a lot of families, they separate and or get divorced, and they're still living in the same household because they can't afford to live separate. But they've officially separated and divorced. They will still need to file as if they were married. So, but if you are living in separate households, then again, you have to figure out which of you are going to be the parent that files the FAFSA. And before I forget, let's just say that you do remarry, but you're filing the prior tax return of, let's just say where we are right now using 2023, and you didn't remarry until 2024, and your student is starting college in 2025, you will still have to add your new spouse um, into the FAFSA and the CSS profile mix, even though you weren't married on the tax return that you're filing. So then you're ended up having to do some, um, you know, both the both the biological parent and the step parent both are going to have the FSA ID username and password to be able to input your information. So it starts to get a little bit sticky. So let's just say, and as you see here, the step parent will require to be added as a contributor. A parent is considered a contributor. So some more lingo that you'll have to get used to as you get into this process. So some of the things to consider, try to have those discussions with your former spouse or your soon-to-be ex, and see if you can manage those conversations. Because quite honestly, the schools, they don't care what your divorce decree says. I had a mom who called me 2 weeks ago, a real, different situation. The dad is supposed to be the one to take care of college, and he's in jail. She had him arrested for because he was behind on child support. And she said, and now he's not doing the FAFSA because he's in jail. And I said, well, I'm sorry, for your situation, but the college and the kids were already in college. And she said, I can't get him to file the FAFSA. And I said, well, either you're going to have to file the FAFSA, and or your kids are not going to be able to go back, because they were already behind in what they owed for the fall semester, and here we are already have the bill for the spring semester. So, and she was saying, but he's supposed to be the one to pay for college, and I don't want to take out loans. And none of us want to take out loans. So you have to have these conversations early enough so that you are not going to have those kind of problems happening and adding, to the stress of the kids wondering, am I going to be able to go back to my dorm, or am I going to have to pack up? So, child support, it used to be counted as income, which was very unfair. Now it's counted as an asset. So income is assessed much higher on the FAFSA and the CSS profile than our assets are. So that was a good thing that happened when they made some of these changes to the FAFSA. But it's going to be the child support that you receive for all of your children, not just for the the child that you're filing the FAFSA for that's going to be going off to college. 529 accounts. Now here's a good benefit. If the owner of the 529 account happens to be the non-custodial parent, the one who is not going to be filing the FAFSA, then that is not added as a parent asset on the FAFSA. So that can save a little bit of reduce what you'll be expected to pay out of pocket, reduce your student aid index, the SAI. And so that's a good thing that happened. If you know, as this changed, if some parents have said, well, should I have the 529 in my name and my income is considerably less, I'll qualify the for the subsidized loan and the Pell Grant and such. Should I transfer the ownership back to my ex-spouse? And it can be a tricky situation because whoever is the owner of that 529 can now do whatever they wish with that 529. If they cash it in, they'll, take the tax penalty. But so you have to be really sure that you're both on board with that, whether that's going to be a good scenario to do or not. So this is just kind of a little bit of a graph showing, the old rules versus the new. There were a couple of states, I think California is one of them, that said that it must be a legal separation. Now, I haven't seen that challenged yet, so if you're in California, you want to check on that. But pretty much, I haven't had anybody that has been challenged with that. And I've had California families as clients as well. So remember, if you're still living together, you're planning on getting separated, you haven't done it yet, you're still living together, and it's time to file, you would still have to file as if you were married. The custodial parent, again, whoever provides the most financial support, not just the child support. Your family size, we discussed that. If you've got other members that you're supporting because of remarriage, or maybe you've got a elderly parent that's living with you, but they're not on your tax return or such, you can still count them as part of your household. So, and then financial aid counts as students' self-support. Used to be, yes, that's no longer the case. So again, your student is still going to be a dependent of yours until such time as they're, either over the age of 24 or the other things that we had mentioned earlier. So I think, Debbie, I think that's pretty much the slides that we had. Are there any
Yes,
questions?
lots of questions. So let me go through some of them. Um, this is a question. And some of this you might have answered, but maybe if you could just, reiterate it, as people are asking. Does only one parent's income count? I'm not remarried, but my ex is. I make more than my ex, but his salary combined with his wife is slightly more than what I make.
So
So,
again,
yeah.
you'll hear that somebody, if you guys can't come to terms with which one of you provides the most financial support, they say then the tie is whichever parent earns more than the other, who earns the most. So again, it's not so much if you make more than your spouse, or your ex, and now he's got a new spouse, and now they combined make more than it's not so much your income right now as it is financial support. So if the kids are, staying with you more than with your ex, and you're providing, say, their health insurance and car insurance and, half the cell phone bill or whatever, just start to think about all those things and to to come to an agreement as far as which of you will be the parent that files the FAFSA. And so now I'm just gonna put this out there. If your income, if both of your incomes, you and your ex, you're well over $100,000, it's not going to make a difference, really, as far as the FAFSA is concerned. You're making way too much money to be able to qualify for the federal Pell Grant or the subsidized portion of the student loans. So if you can't, easily and with a minimal amount of stress, come to terms with which of you are going to be the FAFSA filer, if your income is in those categories, it's not going to make that big of a difference. So, but if you're, right in that maybe $60,000 or less income, adjusted gross income with minimal assets, and maybe you've got 2 or 3 kids, you're still not going to qualify for the full Pell Grant at that income, but your student could end up qualifying for a partial Pell, maybe the subsidized portion of the student loan, which is 0% interest while they're in school. And then maybe they might get some other state grant or grant monies coming from the school. So hopefully that answered.
So maybe another thing to kind of share with people is that there's not, as you've probably guessed hearing Luann explain this, is not like some black and white set of rules that say you pay for this, your ex pays for this, you're the financial, you provide more financial support, and therefore you fill out the FAFSA. It's not black and white like that, it's just, but I guess at the end of the day, and if somebody, meaning a college, or were to ask for verification, you need to prove whatever decision you have made. And so that's really kind of what it comes down to, is a little bit of just being honest, or but basically if you're called on it, you need to prove that however you made the decision about who's going to fill it out, you have proof to show that that person was truly the person that provided more financial support.
Absolutely. I had someone last year. One parent made quite a bit more than the other parent. And the other parent was able to have such a low income that the student was going to qualify for the full Pell Grant and 100% needs met school, got accepted to an Ivy, and that Ivy came back and they wanted they provided a spreadsheet. We want to know, you as the parent, how can you be providing, the most of the financial support for your student, because they had the other parent's income because it was a CSS profile school. And so they were able to quantify it because the other parent was able to provide the health insurance through Medicaid through his unemployment benefits or lower income benefits and such. And but he had to break it down what he was providing as far as financial support for the student and the household. So you need to be able to have that documentation if it's going to be asked for.
Okay, so another question, if the divorced parents are claiming their student as a dependent for IRS tax returns on alternate years, does that have to change to steer towards one parent?
No, not yet. Would it benefit? It just depends. In some cases, it could benefit where it will make it easier especially if there's going to be the full Pell Grant. But it's a case by case scenario.
Next question. So in 2024, I lost my job and I haven't found, my next role. Am I in a good position for more support and financial aid?
Yes and no. You know, so if I had this conversation with someone this morning, so you're using your 23 tax return for filing for this 25-26 school year. The parent lost their job in June of 2024. So they still had half the year of income in 24 plus a severance package. So actually their income was showing a little bit higher in 24 than in 23 because of the severance and such. So most of the time, the schools, you lose your job, the first thing you're saying is, oh, I've got to contact the school to let them know I just lost my job. They're not going to even consider any kind of professional judgment in that area until you've been without a job for at least 6 months. Because they're expecting that you're just going to go out and get another job. So it might benefit, but if it's, I always tell parents if, like for this year, they're using the 23 tax return and they lost their job at the beginning of 24 and they've had a substantial change in their income. They still have to use the 23 tax return. They're getting their taxes done as soon as possible so that once the financial aid awards start coming in for the schools that their kids have applied to, they can then submit for special circumstances, professional judgment, have that tax return ready for documentation to show here's the proof that I have earned much less. And so then it's going to be up to the school how they're going to take that into consideration.
And a good question here that I don't think we really addressed yet. Does it matter if parents were never married but now live in separate households?
If you were never married, then but there is a relationship. They are the biological parents, and there's, support and having not custody, but joined custody, I guess. Then you're still going to have to decide which of you are going to file the FAFSA. But if you were never married and you don't know where that parent is, then you're just filing as a head of
As a single
household.
parent, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so we don't,
I will
yeah, go ahead.
say, I will say, if you know the name of the parent, and even if you don't have any contact with them, you still have to provide that on the CSS profile as the biological parent, and then get a waiver for the non-custodial parent. But it has nothing to do with the FAFSA.
Well, so I mean, we have talked a lot about the FAFSA and who the parent is, who's going to fill it out. And we didn't talk in as much detail about the CSS profile. Do you want to just kind of give a few minutes about
Sure.
how this, being divorced and how it relates to CSS profile?
Yeah, so the CSS profile is a much more detailed form. I refer to it as a financial colonoscopy. They're asking for everything, your retirement, your equity in your home, the money that's under a rock in your backyard, everything. And so if your kind of your income and assets should pretty much jive the same FAFSA and CSS, but then it asks for other, um, more of your retirement and equity and business holdings and whatnot. So, but when it comes to filing, even if there is no custody arrangement and your ex has never paid child support, but they're still in your student's life, they still will occasionally come to, something at the school or such, but they're, 2 years behind in child support and such, you're still going to have to put their information down as a parent on the CSS profile. And then this is run by the College Board for the colleges. And then the College Board is going to email a request for your ex to complete a non-custodial CSS profile. And because they're going to take that person's income and assets, combine it with yours to come up with however much financial need-based aid or institutional aid that they would be willing to provide for you. Now, if your ex does not cooperate, then either, I've had financial aid offices at schools say, well, then we're not the school for your student because we require that. Now, sometimes you can get a waiver, but it's very detailed. It gets very, it can be kind of hard too, especially if there's been instances where there's no contact because it was going to be harmful to you and your children. And maybe there's abuse and courts and psychiatrists and whatnot. And it brings up a lot of really painful memories for the child, which is unfortunate. But, unfortunately, people lie about so much of this that I think they've really had to buckle down with these kind of forms and such. So, you have to, most of the colleges are going to require a non-custodial CSS waiver. There's only like a handful of the schools that don't. There's probably close to 260 to close to 300 schools that require the CSS profile. So if you feel that that's going to be too intrusive and or that it's definitely going to put your family out of any running for any kind of financial aid, then oftentimes we tell families to just stick to the FAFSA only schools.
Right.
So again, the pre-planning for all of this is a big deal.
Right, that's exactly what I was going to emphasize. That's why it's so important to understand this process and how it relates to your particular situation. Especially, and again, I'm so happy that families are here that have juniors because it could seriously impact, what schools your students should or should not be looking at. Because, if depending on your situation and whether or not if you can't, if it's not going to be cooperative with your ex. So, as Luann said, you may not want to be looking at schools that are going to require the non-custodial financial aid form on the CSS profile. And again, the earlier to know this, the better. So you're not, wasting time. Your student isn't kind of getting kind of their hopes up, interested in particular schools, and you're just better kind of targeting where your focus should be. And I know maybe this sounds a little disappointing. Well, my student had their heart set on a particular school. There are so many good schools out there that, the earlier that you focus on the right set of schools, the better, and you're not going to, quote, miss out.
Right.
I just don't, we've seen so many students go to so many different schools that I just don't believe that you're going to miss out if you don't go. There is no dream school. So, hopefully get that out of your idea and your students' vocabulary right now. I would never even use that word.
Yeah, because they usually turn into nightmares. But I will say that, all right, let's just say that you are going to be need to file the CSS profile and a non-custodial profile. Just so that you know, neither one of you are going to see any of your financial information. It's a completely separate login. It's completely separate. I work with a lot of families that are either divorced or separated and such, and I keep everything separate with both. And they can, you log in with your own password and such, and it never, you never see each other's income and assets. The only time that that would happen is if you gave your student, the login and password of your account.
So somebody did say, I still don't understand how this works for divorced couples who clearly will not share their income. And I think kind of Luann just answered that. I will say there's one, kind of stickiness when it comes to not knowing your spouse's income, or sorry, your ex's income. And that is when you're trying to estimate um, your costs at colleges, or estimate what age you might get. Again, since a lot of families here are families of juniors, I don't know if you've heard of the term NPC, which is net price calculator. And that is a calculator all colleges are required to have on their websites. You can Google, most colleges, hopefully you can find it on their website, but if you can't, you can always Google the name of the college and the word net price calculator. And it's a way that the colleges help families estimate what their final cost or their net cost will be at that college. So it gives you a peek. It's not a guarantee, but it gives you a peek into, will you get aid or will you get merit at that school? And I have to admit, for divorced families, when you and if it's a college that is going to require the CSS profile, it is hard for you to estimate what that cost is going to be because you might not have your spouse's, income. Of course, the net price calculator is just, nobody's looking over your shoulder. You could put in different numbers, if you want to guess at what your spouse's or your ex's, sorry, income and assets are going to be. But if you don't know, it just, you are going in a little blinder, I have to say, unfortunately. And we've had that situation where a family or parent, a student got into actually an Ivy, but didn't get the aid that they thought that they were going to receive. The parent, they're divorced, and the mother has no idea, obviously, about what financials the ex supplied. So she doesn't, but obviously whatever information he supplied, it tipped the the financial aid scale, and they didn't get as much aid, and yet she's the one who's going to pay for college. So I sympathetic. Those are all sticky situations. There's not a ton that we can do other than to just kind of give you a heads up early on in the process.
Or, sometimes you just have to have a third party come in. So what I've done with some of the families that I've worked with, I don't, I don't speak
That's true. You can,
jointly.
yeah, Luann, you can play that role because
Correct.
of kind of gathering the information from both sides and hopefully helping them with a better outcome. And then, and the privacy is kept between,
Correct.
both sides. Yes.
Yeah, you can, I can run the net price calculator or the calculations on each one and add it together and just let them know, okay, it's going to be in this ballpark. So that at least, they're not going in blind, but it's hard if, because most don't want each other to know their financials, and that's fair enough.
So somebody's asking, do you need to update this information every year?
If you're receiving institutional aid for the CSS profile, yes. Most schools are going to require that. The FAFSA you would do every year regardless. If you're not, especially if you're going to have your child use the federal loans, or maybe you're going to take the Parent Plus loans, you file the FAFSA each year. But as far as the CSS profile, most schools, if you're getting their aid coming from their coffers, they will ask you to do the profile again. There's a couple of them out there that say, no, just do it for the first year. And if your situation changes, then you can file it.
So Luann, somebody said that on one of the slides, the bullet referring to the 529 account said the 529 account owned by the non-custodial parent is not assessed on FAFSA as an asset, but one of the earliest slides said that FAFSA responsibility doesn't depend on custody. I think maybe they were just kind of confused by that terminology of non-custodial, the way you were using it.
Right, right. So so let's say mom is the custodial parent for filing the FAFSA. So again, it's not custody from as divorce, but it's just a terminology. The parent that's going to file the FAFSA is considered the custodial FAFSA parent. And then the non-custodial parent, the other parent, has the 529 in their name, then it's not going to be assessed as an asset on the FAFSA. But if they're using a CSS profile school, that parent is going to have to disclose that 529 as, one of their assets as a parent asset.
Here's a good question. Does the child support I pay get deducted from my income if it's being added to my ex's?
Say that again.
The parent is asking, does the child support that they pay get deducted from their income since it's being added to the ex's income?
Oh, no longer. It used to be. And then the IRS, this wasn't a FAFSA change, it was an IRS change. And so I don't remember. It depends on the year that you got divorced and how your child support was set up. But if you got divorced in the last few years and have child support, it's not going to be calculated as what you're paying out anymore, and as what the parent that's receiving it, it's not going to count as income. So that was an IRS change.
If one parent pays monthly to another parent to share expenses, but it's not formal child support, is this considered an asset, or how is this considered?
So if it's still sitting in their savings account at the time that they go to file the FAFSA, that money would get counted. So it's not a formal child support. So you don't have to technically disclose it because it's not a formal child support arrangement. But if the money is still sitting in your savings account, then it's counted as an asset.
But it can be considered basically when they're figuring out who's paying more of the expenses.
Correct.
What if my child support ends the summer before the student starts college? Do we still list it as an asset if it won't be there when the first tuition payment is due?
I mean, so it's the asset that you received that year. So you're going to count it as an asset. So let's just say that your student turned 18 in June and the child support ended. They start college and you were going to file, you would have filed the FAFSA in December, say, of the prior year. So you would count the child support that you had received for that last 12 months. If on the CSS profile, where you can explain these things, you can explain my child support is going to end on X, whatever date. And so that in most cases, there's only a few states that you actually can set up child supports that it's going to go through to college, unless you've, made those kind of arrangements with your divorce decree. So most of the time, parents are, the child support ends when they graduate high school or turn 18.
Here's a good question. There, someone's asking, just do you have suggestions of other categories they should consider when they're kind of counting up who provides support? So obviously he's saying car insurance, health insurance, cell phone. What else? I mean, I'll throw out any sort of activities, if
Yeah,
it's a summer program, tutoring, test prep,
yeah. I mean, anything that
clothing.
Yeah, food, especially if you have boys, it's, and that's something to consider too. When your kids go off to college, you're getting a little bit of a break because you no longer have all of those multitude of expenses, that you're normally, paying for. But, I mean, just any kind of anything, even, um, uh, allowances. I mean, maybe one family gives
Or
their kids,
vacations,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
My kids are usually listed at my address, but me and my ex share custody 50-50. If my ex files the FAFSA, should we change their address in the kids' records for her address?
No, you don't want to go to that extreme. Whatever the records are, the address for the student, for the school records, you want to keep that, keep that the same.
If you have to file every year, can you alternate which parent fills it out?
You can, if it's, that's when you're gonna get some red flags.
Yeah. I mean, I would honestly every year like truly consider who's the parent providing the most financial support. Again, if you ever get asked to verify it, do you have the records to verify it? And that would be the parent who should fill it out, regardless of who filled it out the previous year.
Correct. It's not going to benefit. It can be a disservice to do it that way, because there's the possibility of lost, financial aid, also red flags. But it's not like, where you're declaring your student on your tax return and then the other parent is going to do it the following year. There's no financial benefit to doing it every other year like that.
So here's a question. And honestly, I'm only going to be able to do one more question after this because I have another
Okay.
webinar, and you're all
Holy moly.
welcome to
Yep.
stay at 8:30, where we're reviewing the early decision and early action results. So, but this question, if both families or both households make over 100,000, is it not worth filling out the FAFSA?
Well, you didn't hear my story at the beginning, I guess. Everybody should file the FAFSA. That's how I look at it. I've seen too many instances where they needed it because life changes in the blink of an eye. I mean, look at what's happening in California right now, what happened in North Carolina just a couple months ago. It takes you 30 minutes to file the FAFSA. Just file it.
So let me just give you my 2 cents on the FAFSA, just to kind of like summarize it. As Luann explained earlier, depending on your income, but it's really for low-income families. The FAFSA helps the government determine who is most needy that they needs to receive Pell Grants. Okay, so the FAFSA is a federal form. So the federal government is using it to decide how to spend their money, and the money that they are providing is Pell Grants or subsidized or subsidized loans to students. Every student who fills out the form, regardless of your family's income, and seriously, your parent can make $1 million. If they fill out the FAFSA, the student has access to the student federal loans, which is the maximum of $5,500, and they can borrow that. So the FAFSA is for the federal government to make these determinations: who gets the Pell Grant, who gets subsidized loans, and then basically who fills it out and who wants to borrow from the federal government, and which parents want to borrow from the federal government with the Parent Plus loan. Colleges, if they are not using the CSS profile, then use the information from FAFSA in terms of what they call your student aid index, and then they are using the information to determine if they are going to give any additional money from the college's aid sources. So although it's a federal form, you can say, well, the government's not going to give me any money, and they might not. You might not be eligible for Pell Grants. You might not even be eligible for subsidized loans. You may, depending on the college that your student applies to, be eligible for aid from the college based on the FAFSA. So that's the other importance of filling out the FAFSA. It's not just, is the government giving me aid, but it is, is the college using that information to decide whether to give me aid.
And also, there are some schools that require the FAFSA to be filed for providing the merit scholarships as well. So if you are adamant that you don't want to file the FAFSA, then what you should do is call each school that your student will be applying to and ask them, do you require the FAFSA to be filed in order for my student to receive merit scholarships? That has nothing to do with income or assets. And if they say, correct, you do not have to file the FAFSA or the CSS profile in order to receive merit scholarships, and if you call back again the next day and talk to a second person and they give you the same answer, then don't file. But always make sure that you get the same answer twice before you make a decision that could end up costing you a fair bit of money.
Okay, I know that there are more questions. I'm sorry that we can't answer them all, but again, I'm very encouraged and glad for the families that are here with juniors and sophomores in high school, that you learn this information. You can better position yourself as you start the process. We do a lot of sessions like this, really just to help educate families. But I will say, and this is not the reason why we do the sessions, if you want, to purchase an hour with Luann to just understand what your situation is and make sure you have everything clear and you're going into the process with the right understanding for your situation, because again, we've kind of explained it to you, but as Luann said, everybody's situation, is a little bit different sometimes. It might be worth it. It's like a great kind of insurance policy to really understand that you are thinking of your situation in the right way, and that you're starting the process like with the right marching orders to know what type of schools to consider or how to estimate, or maybe in the best of cases, you and your ex want to use Luann as that intermediary person to make sure that you're sharing information but not really sharing information, and it's all for the best situation of helping your student find the right college, which ultimately you can both afford. So a link to this will be sent out tomorrow. We will probably do, in the next few months, another session similar. Again, I just encourage people to start to get their ducks in order, start to understand where they sit based on the information that you learned tonight, and then use that in the college search process. And ultimately, find the right colleges and build the right college list that your student's going to apply to. It's the most important part of the whole process. Okay, well, thanks everybody. If you want to hear about early admission results, just log on again at 8:30. Thank you, Luann.
Thanks, Debbie. I'm going to wait for the replay.
Okay. Sounds good.
Good luck, everyone, and thank you for coming tonight.
Okay, good night. Bye-bye.
Take care.